Hi, I'm Juliet Grames, Associate Publisher at Soho Press and the editor of the Soho Crime imprint. I'm really excited to tell you today about some of the highlights of our 2022 list. First, I want to introduce two absolutely stunning debut novels. First, Ramona Emerson's Shutter, which we're publishing in August. Shutter is the story of Rita Todachin, a young woman working as a forensic photographer for the Albuquerque police force. Now, Rita has a secret. She can see ghosts. This makes her an exceptionally good forensic photographer because she catches clues that other investigators are missing. But unfortunately, it means that the ghosts who have figured out that she can see them will not leave her alone. They harass her, especially when they're seeking justice for crimes that are going unsolved. And at the beginning of this book, Rita is attached, finds herself attached to a particularly persistent ghost who can't remember how she died, but is insisting that she was murdered by a cartel. Now, Rita is a member of the Navajo Nation, and she left the reservation where she was raised by her loving grandmother when she realized that this very taboo ability to see spirits was always going to ostracize her from her community. And what Ramona Emerson, the author, offers us is both a completely five sensory experience of a woman who can see ghosts and who somehow manages to solve crimes, get her head around this unusual ability and to rise above it, kind of a la Jessica Jones, as an ordinary woman who has to become a superhero. But also she tells this gorgeous coming of age story about life on the Navajo reservation. And I think that this book will appeal to so many readers on both of those levels, both as a Stephen King-esque a crime novel with shades of horror and supernatural to it, but also to that gorgeous coming of age story. It's a passport into the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. It reveals so much about the history and culture of this area. And Ramona Emerson, the author, is certainly a talent to watch. Just read the first chapter and you will be completely caught up in her voice. Emerson herself is a filmmaker, and she's an award-winning, she's done documentary work, including working with Deb Holland, and she and her husband own a company called Real Indian Pictures that has just done so much excellent documentary work about Indigenous peoples, and she is just an incredible talent to have on our list. I hope that you enjoy this absolutely sparkling read and that you'll be thrilled to learn it is the first in a trilogy. Next, Eli Craner's Don't Know Tough. This debut novel was the winner of the Peter Lovesey First Crime Novel Contest and is unlike any crime novel you've ever read before. Set in a small town in Arkansas where high school football is basically religion, it is a counterpoint story told between the 2 points of view of Billy, a very troubled high school senior who's a football player, the star of the football team, but whose home life is so dangerous and abusive that he gets out his aggression on the field, and the point of view of his coach, a born-again Christian who's recently arrived in Arkansas and thinks that he can save Billy, both, religiously, but also to save him from his troubled home life. When, on the eve of the playoffs, a murder occurs or a mysterious death occurs in their town, it is pinned on Billy, and the entire town is about to erupt in drama if the truth doesn't come out. What it results is so explosive. This book has been called Friday Night Lights Gone Dark. Eli Craner is certainly a voice to watch. His literary noir Southern Gothic sensibilities have been compared to those of Wiley Cash or Megan Abbott. And as a former professional football player, as well as a high school football coach, he knows that of which he writes. You must check this one out. Next, I have two books to tell you about in fan favorite series on the Soho Crime list. First, Mccarrans Bad Actors. If you're not already reading the Slough House series featuring the demoted and disgraced spies of MI5, the Slow Horses. You really need to catch up. This series is just spectacular. It has won many CWA daggers and other awards, but it's funny, it's relevant, it's extremely political, and most time sensitively, it is now being adapted into an Apple TV series featuring Gary Oldman as Jackson Lamb and my favorite, Kristen Scott Thomas as Diana Taverner. So just make sure you're caught up on all your latest Mccarran before this goes on the network. Next, fans will be thrilled to know that Stephanie Barron has returned with a 14th installment in her Being a Jane Austen mystery series. In this novel, Jane Austen and her sister Cassandra have gone to Cheltenham Spa to take the waters there because Jane is feeling poorly. The year is 1816, and a volcano in the South Pacific a year earlier has produced a cloud that has caused the entire planet to have no summer for an entire year, a real historical fact. And so Jane and Cassandra, while at their boarding house in Cheltenham, of course, discover a mysterious death that they have to investigate because no one else can help. It is just another charming installment in this series written so pitch perfectly in Jane Austen's voice. It's certain to delight all of the Jane Austen fans and Bridgerton fans who are looking for perhaps a mystery escape into the same Georgian Regency era world. Make sure you don't miss this one. Last, but certainly not least, I am absolutely thrilled to tell you about Gary Phillips' One Shot Harry. I am over the moon to have Gary join us here at Soho for this book, which is set in 1963 in Los Angeles, on the eve of Martin Luther King's March on Washington. It features Korean War vet Harry Ingram, an African-American crime scene photographer, freelance photojournalist, who at the beginning of the novel is basically forced into the role of private investigator when his white army buddy, a jazz musician, is discovered dead in a car wreck. Harry, the first on the scene with his camera, sees that the brake lines were cut and he realizes that his buddy was probably murdered, although it's being written off as an accident. Harry takes matters into his own hands to investigate what really happened, and the story that unfolds is a completely gorgeously wrought confection, a time capsule of 1963 LA. It's African-American neighborhoods that continue to exist and that have since been destroyed or moved. A moment in African-American history where the March on Washington is about to happen, and where the Nation of Islam is on the rise, and where the foundations of our current extremely relevant conversation about police brutality and about civil rights is all just constantly on everyone's mind at every moment of the day. What Gary has done is he has distilled our zeitgeist into this 1963 depiction of LA as I've never read it before. This is an incredibly immersive read, a lovable character you're going to want to follow for a long time. And best of all, Gary has agreed to join us today for a quick chat about the book. So let him tell you about Harry Ingram and One Shot Harry in his own words. Gary Phillips, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about One Shot Harry, which I'm just so over the moon that Soho has the chance to publish this book this year.
Well, thank you so much, Juliet.
Could you tell all these fine folks what your inspiration was for One Shot Harry?
A life not well lived or something like that, I suppose. But no, I've grown up here in Los Angeles, and now, of course, I'm old enough to remember some of that distant past as a small child. And I think, coming of age here, and then my dad, who was part of that, my dad and my mother, who were part of that Black migration from the South or the Southwest, I guess. Texas is its own weird whatever. Who came west for opportunity and a better chance. And hearing all those stories as a kid coming up, I guess that's really where I'm going with this. Or, my dad sitting around the kitchen table having a couple of beers with his buddies and talking about those old days, and then I'd always hear those stories, and so there was always in my head, and I think those stories have always found their way through some of my writing and through the various novels I've done now over a period of years. And it kind of culminated, I guess, when you and I met and we started talking about what I was going to do, and the chance then to, I think, capture some part of an LA history that's not often talked about, not often gone into. And so that became a very exciting idea for me.
Well, I think, 1963 and the Martin Luther King's March on Washington and all of these other true historical moments that you've integrated into the plot. This was such a watershed moment in American history as well as in LA history. And I personally had never seen the LA side of that story told.
Right.
And especially the way you bring African American LA to life in neighborhoods that don't exist anymore, and in moments of history that aren't ever written about. But I also think that there's just a ton of resonance for our current moment, and the issues that you're tapping into here just feel as immediate and important now as they were in 1963. So that is certainly just something I can't wait to bring this book to readers, because I think they're going to read it on those two levels. But when you are writing about this LA, this lost and also not lost LA that is, very much yours, what are your tools for researching?
Well, you kids now have those the Googles and the internets, which is available. So that's good for little quick pops. But honestly, I'm still of the old school variety. So I have a great many lovely books about Los Angeles history and about sort of the broader history of that time period on my shelf, and so I use those, of course, as source material in terms of looking up some sort of factual information that I may want. But as we know, I mean, listen, this is not a preachy book. This is hopefully not a book I'm standing on a soapbox about. It is a murder mystery, and it is hopefully a compelling character in Harry Ingram, this Korean War vet who's now a kind of freelance journalist, photojournalist in Los Angeles in '63, as you mentioned. And so it's with that in mind, right? It's with that in mind, sort of laying the groundwork for some of this accuracy and some of this lost history. For instance, the Santa Monica Freeway, which was being finished then, which actually was being built and finished then, which actually then uprooted several communities coming, from the east and to the west to all the way out to the beach, is a known history, but not known particularly outside of, I suppose, local LA. So I thought it was kind of interesting to include some of that. So all these little sort of factoids and tidbits sort of filter in, but again, it's always in the context of Harry and his search for who may have killed his friend from the war, and what that leads him to. And as you also mentioned, it is a truism, or it is a true fact that, in fact, 4 months before the historic March on Washington, Martin Luther King came back to Los Angeles and held what was called a Freedom Rally at our version of Wrigley Field, not the more famous one in Chicago, but the Wrigley's had actually built a field that the AAA baseball teams played at here in South Central, and so the rally was held there. It was called the Freedom Rally, and that's kind of the center point, in the book, as events kind of bring us all to that moment in time.
I mean, Harry Ingram is certainly just such a compelling character. I hope you don't mind that I tell our viewers today that we've just signed a second book with him. So I'm excited for him to perhaps become a series. But just the way he's such a nice guy, heart of gold, but also, willing to do what he's got to do to get the job done, to seek justice for his buddy, to try to get to the bottom of what really happened, to get to the truth. I think he's exactly the kind of character that readers are looking for, a hero they can root for. I am curious, I just want to ask you one question. What made you decide to make him a Korean War vet?
Oh, I thought again, I guess thinking my own dad and his brothers were World War II vets, and I've talked about some of that in some of my books, or used characters, based kind of on those guys. And again, those part of those stories that I heard, from my father growing up. But I thought, well, one thing for sure, right? Korean War was the first time that the troops are integrated. Now, this is actually after MacArthur is fired for insubordination. But it is actually the first time that the troops are desegregated. So that's always kind of an interesting time period. And there's a couple of, to be quite honest, there's a couple of great. There was a filmmaker named Sam Fuller who was kind of the king of, I guess, the B movies in the 50s and early 60s. And but he made a kind of he himself was a World War II vet, but he made several movies about the Korean War. And in one of them, he has a black character. In fact, it's Nat King Cole. And I don't know, for some reason, I guess that was always in my head, and sort of looking at race relations, and then in the middle of the war and all this sort of stuff. And that again is just part of Harry's backdrop, right? It's part of the things that have shaped Harry, that have now brought him to this moment in time. And I guess it's worth noting that his friend, his white friend from the war, is the one who dies under mysterious circumstances, and this is what sets Harry off, on his mission, on his investigation. And I guess it's worth noting too that we should also mention, and I guess this this would be in the press materials and all that, but Harry himself, Harry Ingram, is based on, is or inspired by, I shouldn't say based on, inspired by two real photographers. There was a Harry Adams, who was a black photographer here in LA, and he captured a lot of the sights and sounds of that time period. And then there was also the famous Ouija, right? Arthur Felig in New York, who people know about, of course. He inspired the 50s show with Charles Bronson called Man with the Camera. I think there's a later movie with Joe Pesci where he's essentially playing that character. Anyway, those two guys were definitely on my mind when I sort of used them as templates or as inspiration points to create Harry Ingram. But then also, to give him that background in the Korean War, and to give him this kind of somewhat murky background about his family. I don't really go much into it, right? There's a couple of passages in the book where Harry alludes to his mother, who's still around but is not living in town, and his somewhat ne'er-do-well father. So if I get more Harry books out, if I can get more Harry books done somewhere down the line, maybe we'll get a little bit more in depth on that as well.
Well, I personally can't wait. And I think the richness of all of the historical inspirations that come into Harry, that come into his world building, the absolute confection you've created of this depiction of ballet with real cameo appearances by so many historical figures. There's so much in this to delight readers. And Gary, I can't wait to share this with the world. So thank you so much for talking to us today. And let's do it again.
Right. Thank you, Juliet.